Continuing with my read-through of the Bible, I now come to the book of Tobit. Now, Tobit actually represents a departure from the books of the Bible that I've previously covered for a few different reasons. First of all, this is the first jump backwards in chronology we've had so far. So up until now, all the books in the historical narrative of the Bible, from Genesis all the way through Ezra and Nehemiah, have been in chronological order. Ezra and Nehemiah ending with the period of the Persian Empire. But now Tobit is jumping backwards in the chronology to the period of the Assyrian Empire, which was a few empires before the Persian Empire. So this is the first time that we've had to jump backwards in chronology, but from here on out, the rest of the Old Testament is going to be all over the place in terms of chronology. So say goodbye to chronological order of the historical books. It was nice while it lasted. But the second big difference with the book of Tobit is not in the Protestant Bibles. And the Protestant Bibles are what I grew up on, which means I've not actually read this before. Up until now, all the books in the Bible that I've talked about are books of the Bible that I remember studying in Sunday school and in my the private Christian schools I went to, as well as the read-through of the Bible, which I did when I was in middle school just for my own devotional time. But in all of that, I never covered the book of Tobit before because it wasn't in the Protestant Bible. So Tobit is part of what is known to Protestants as the Apocrypha and what is known to Catholics as the Deuterocanon. So these are a series of books. I forget how many off the top of my head. Sorry, I forgot to look this up before I was doing it. But it's a series of books that are in the Old Testament, that are in some versions of the Bible, including the Catholic Bible, and I think some of them are in the Eastern Orthodox versions of the Bible, but they're not in the Protestant Bibles. They are books that were written in Greek during the Hellenistic period by Greek-speaking Jews. So they were part of the Jewish faith community, but they didn't actually speak Hebrew, or at least they spoke Greek. They were much more comfortable with Greek. So this was after Alexander the Great's conquest, when the whole Mediterranean world was speaking Greek. So the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, was translated into Greek in what was known as the Septuagint, and these extra books were part of the Septuagint, but not part of the original Hebrew Bible. Because the early Christian community tended to be largely Greek-speaking Gentiles, the early Christians were more familiar with the Septuagint than they were with the original Hebrew. And so the early Christians adopted these extra books of the Bible, which were only in the Greek Septuagint version of the Old Testament and not the original Hebrew version. And they were just part of the Christian Bible up until the time of the Protestant Reformation, at which time the Protestants rejected these books for a few different reasons, some doctrinal reasons, but I think the primary reason is because that these books were not recognized by the Hebrews as part of their canon. As Judaism became more codified, the Hebrews decided that only the books in the original Hebrew would be recognized as official canon for them. The Protestants rejected the books on that basis. But they are still part of the Catholic Bible to this day. Now, all that being said, actually, interestingly enough, Tobit is kind of an exception to that rule, because a little bit of research on Wikipedia reveals that with the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, it does turn out that there were actually Hebrew versions of Tobit way back in, I guess, the first century or whatever. And that indicates also that Tobit would have been more widespread among the Jewish communities at the time than was thought. But remember, the Dead Sea Scrolls weren't discovered until the 20th century. So at the time of the Protestant Reformation and for centuries afterwards, nobody knew that there were copies of Tobit written in Hebrew, and everyone thought these were part of the Septuagint books written only in Greek. My understanding is it's still a matter of debate whether or not Tobit was originally written in Greek and then translated into Hebrew or vice versa. Yeah, I guess the point being, it was thought for a long time that Tobit only existed in Greek. All that being said, let me give my usual disclaimer. I'm not a scholar. I may be getting some of these details wrong. Let me know in the comments if I messed anything up. That's my interpretation of this. The last reason that Tobit represents a little bit of a departure is you can see from the heading here in the Jerusalem Bible that the Jerusalem Bible groups all these three books together here, Tobit, Judith, and Esther, as books which have the literary form of historical stories, but are not attested to from other sources. And they say that these books are intended to teach lessons, but are not strictly speaking historical, to paraphrase the introduction here. In other words, we are now here in the realm of historical fiction, the historical fiction part of the Bible. Now, if perhaps if you're a militant atheist or hang around with them, you might argue that all of the historical parts of the historical narrative of the Bible is historical fiction. But I've seen some other authors use the words historical fiction to refer to Tobit, Judith, and Esther, and I think I understand the reasons why. So, let's go over to our chronology of the historical books here of the Bible. The historical books start off purely in the mythological realm. So when we talk about like the historical narratives or Genesis and Exodus, that is pure mythology. There is no real history at all. I mean, the only thing that's real, I guess, is the geography. Like there really was an Egypt, there really was a Canaan, but there is none of the named figures in here line up with anything we know from history. None of this checks out with archaeology, etc. And that is true also of Joshua, Judges. And then I guess we get into the historical period, arguably with King David, but definitely by 1st and 2nd Kings, and definitely by Ezra and Nehemiah. Now we are firmly in the historical period here. So we move from the mythological period to the historical period, with maybe some fuzzy grounds in the middle here. But this is the historical fiction period. So it's the authors of these books are familiar with the history of the Assyrian Empire, and they are referencing a lot of names and real historical personages and events. So, for example, Sennacherib, the emperor of Assyria, is referenced here. He was a real historical person. It referenced his invasion of Judah, which is a real historical event. I mean, it's in the Bible, but it's also in the Assyrian sources themselves. Sennacherib was killed by his sons here. That's a real thing that happened. His son Esarhaddon succeeded him. That's also a real thing that happened. So it's grounded in historical background. But the story of Tobit and his family, this is all, well, as the Jerusalem Bible itself says, not attested from any other sources, and the books are found to treat the facts of history and geography with a good deal of freedom. Okay. I'm 10 minutes into this video and I haven't even gotten to the book of Tobit. Apologies. Well, like I said, this was my first time reading through this. So this was my first time hearing the story. And I'm going to assume that maybe for a lot of people with similar backgrounds, they might not be familiar with this story. So what is it? Well, Tobit is of the tribe of Naphtali. And when the northern tribes get deported to Assyria, the famous 10 lost tribes of Israel in the Assyrian conquest, he is one of those who gets deported into Assyria. So he's living in exile in the Assyrian Empire. He is, however, a God-fearing... God-fearing is maybe the wrong word. He's a devout practitioner of the cult of Yahweh. So the northern tribes, of course, Jeroboam set out the golden calves, and they worshipped at the golden calves instead of going down to the temple at Jerusalem, which the southern tribes said they were supposed to do. But Tobit was an exception. He actually made the pilgrimage down to the temple of Jerusalem every year instead of worshipping at the golden calves. And then when he was deported to Assyria, he rose in the ranks of the Assyrians the Most High granted me the favor of Shalmaneser. I became the king's purveyor. It's reminiscent of the story of Daniel or Joseph, I guess, an exile in a foreign land, succeeding through dint of hard work and honest labor. But just like Joseph and Daniel, he had some setbacks. But then when the king was murdered... so there's a few things that happened. Sennacherib, apparently, according to this version, after his disaster in Judea, it's portrayed as disaster in the biblical narrative. The Assyrian account portrays this as a triumph, but either way, both the Bible and the Assyrian accounts definitely agree that the invasion of Judea did happen under King Sennacherib. King Sennacherib, in his anger, killed a great number of Israelites. So I guess he's taking his anger out on the Israelites, and he's killing a bunch of them. And Tobit, being very pious, is making sure they all have a good burial. So he falls into disfavor because of this, earns the king's anger. But after the king is murdered and his son Esarhaddon succeeded him, Ahikar, the son of my brother Aniel, was appointed chancellor of the exchequer for the kingdom. Okay, so there's a footnote here. We go down and we see that Ahikar is a famous chancellor to Sennacherib and Esarhaddon, king of Assyria. So another historical figure is making its way into this historical fiction. This got my curiosity up. I wanted to see kind of what we know about him, Ahikar. So I Googled it, and there's a Wikipedia entry. And according to what I looked on Wikipedia, it looks like Ahikar is maybe more of a literary figure than a historical figure. So there's a story of Ahikar. Maybe he was a real historical figure, or maybe he wasn't. But he is kind of a legend as being a cupbearer to the king and falling out of favor and then coming back into favor again. And you can look this all up on Wikipedia. There are a lot of Wikipedia holes you can go down when you're researching the book of Tobit. And I'll try and mention some of these as they come up. Wikipedia calls the story of Ahikar like maybe they said that was the first example of world literature, arguably, because it was translated into several different languages in the Mesopotamia. And it's also referenced again at the end of the book. So Tobit is giving advice to his son and saying, "Consider, my child, all that Nabid did to his foster father Achikar. Was he not forced to go underground, though still a living man? But God," and it gives like this whole little summary. And again, look this up on Google. Nadab, the foster son of Achihar. This is all from the story of Achihar, which was this story that was, I guess, in wide circulation at that time. Anyways, back to the story of Tobit. Tobit is a man who's very pious, does all these good deeds. Part of his good deeds includes giving proper burials to any Jews who end up getting killed by the Assyrians, even though he's risking falling into disfavor again. But then in the course of doing this, he gets blinded in a rather bizarre way. He is out in the courtyard after burying a bunch of people. So that night I took a bath and then I went to the courtyard and lay down by the courtyard wall. Since it was hot, I left my face uncovered. I did not know that there were sparrows in the wall above my head. Their hot droppings fell into my eyes. And as a result of the sparrow droppings falling to his eyes, it seems to be just a case of bad luck according to the text. It doesn't seem to be like it's a divine punishment or divine interventions or anything. He developed spots in his eyes, and then as a result of the doctors attempting to treat those spots with ointment, he goes blind altogether. And Ahikar, again the legendary Ahikar, is providing for his upkeep. And his wife Anna is taking up work. So he's blind, and he's just kind of relying on the charity of others and his wife for their help. Meanwhile, there's another story going on, the story of Sarah. So it chanced that on the same day that Sarah, the daughter of Raguel, who lived in Media at Ecbatana, these are places in the Assyrian Empire, also heard insults from one of her father's maids. You must know that she had been given in marriage several times, and that Asmodeus, that worst of demons, had killed her bridegrooms, one after another, before ever they had slept with her, as man with wife. Okay, so Asmodeus, here's another Wikipedia rabbit hole you can fall down. If you Google this and find this in Wikipedia, this was a demon that appeared in a lot of the Jewish Apocrypha literature. I think this is his first and only appearance in any version of the Christian Bible, but it appears in other Jewish stories, so I guess it was well known to the audience. If you look at the Wikipedia entry for Tobit, there's some speculation that the demon derived from a Persian demon who had kind of a similar name. I forget exactly the name of the Persian demon, but again, it's all on Wikipedia. So, yeah, we are into the stories about angels and demons here. So, for whatever reason, I guess because that this demon is maybe in love with Sarah, he keeps killing all her bridegrooms before they have a chance to consummate the marriage. And then we have Tobias. So Tobias is really the main character of this story. He is the son of Tobit. And now Tobit, who's relying on the charity of others, and he wants to take his life, but he decides not to. And Sarah also wants to take her own life because of her misery, but she decides not to. Tobit remembered that he had left some silver with a friend. And so he calls on his son Tobias to go and pick up the silver, and it's like a few days' journey. Now, I guess because the roads aren't safe to travel on, they need someone to take them traveling on the road. And they find a fellow traveler for Tobias, which turns out to be none other than the angel Raphael in disguise, disguising himself as a human, as I guess these angels tend to do. Okay, now Raphael is yet another Wikipedia rabbit hole we can go down. So if you're anything like me, the name Raphael definitely sounded familiar. I know I've heard that angel before, but I couldn't remember what stories exactly I associated Raphael with. So I went to Wikipedia. Looks like Raphael is in the book of Enoch. The book of Enoch is not part of the Catholic Bible, but it is part of some Christian Bibles, like the Ethiopian Bible, I believe. Definitely not part of the Protestant Bible. and then again other apocryphal literature. But yeah, in terms of the Christian Bible, or the Catholic Bible, in terms of the Catholic Bible, I think this is Raphael's only appearance. So Raphael gets hired as a traveling companion for Tobias. Now, as they're going along, they meet a magical fish. So the boy, this is Tobias, had gone down to the river to wash his feet when a great fish leapt out of the water and all but swallowed his foot. Now, according to Wikipedia, this image of the giant fish leaping out of the water became a prominent symbol in Christian iconography from, I guess, time of the early church onwards, because, of course, fish was associated with a symbol for Christ. I believe it was, what was it? In the Greek, the fish was an acronym for Jesus Christ, God's Son, Savior, or something like that. Sorry, not an acronym. What's the word I'm looking for? Acronym. So the fish was a symbol of early Christians. So this fish here was thought by Christians to be representative of the faith. Anyways, the angel Raphael advises him to cut out the gall, heart, and the liver of the fish, which will have magical properties that are used to do things later on in the book. While they're walking, Raphael informs Tobias about his kinswoman Sarah, who has this curse attached to her. But Raphael also tells him that because Tobias is the closest kinswoman to Sarah, he has the first right to marry her, which of course doesn't sound correct to modern ears, but I guess that was the world of the Bible. It was a similar story to Ruth. Boaz had the right to marry Ruth because he was the closest surviving kinsman to her. Oh, that reminds me, I totally forgot to mention this. But Ruth as well is one of the historical fiction books of the Bible. So Ruth, Tobit, Judith, and Esther are the 4 historical fiction books. Ruth is placed in modern-day Christian Bibles in the historical chronology books. But in the Jewish tradition, Ruth was not there originally. Ruth was moved over. It was only later in the Christian tradition that Ruth got moved into the historical chronology. But as with Judith, Esther, and Tobit, Ruth does not follow the story of the nation. It just follows the story of one woman and her romance. So it has that in common with the other books. Oh, sorry, that was something I was going to mention earlier. I forgot, and now I am on a digression. All right, back to the story of Tobit. So then Tobias, when Tobias heard Raphael say this, when he understood that Sarah was his sister, a kinswoman of his father's family, he fell so deeply in love with her that he could no longer call his heart his own. So there's a little bit of a romance here, something for the romance fans. Although it's a bizarre romance because he has not met her at all yet. Sarah has absolutely no agency in this story at all. So I have not even bothered to look up feminist critiques of Tobit, the book of Tobit, but I can only imagine what they're saying. She is simply an object to be traded to her nearest kinswoman. Although I guess in the defense of this book, Tobias, although he's never even met her, falls in love with the idea of her because he's told that she's a good woman from an honest family. And in fact, depending on what version of the book of Tobit you read. There are a few different versions floating around because of different textual history of this. But one of the main themes in some of these versions is apparently that lust in marriage is wrong. So you're not supposed to marry for lustful reasons. You're supposed to marry for good reasons, if that makes up for anything. So anyways, Raphael is encouraging Tobias in this marriage, and then they meet up with Raguel, Sarah's husband. Tobias is adamant that he wants to marry. Raphael is facilitating some of this talking. Raguel tries to warn him about the curse, but Tobias still wants to marry. Raguel even goes so far as to dig a grave for Tobias on the wedding night because, if 7 have been killed so far. But Tobias has been instructed by Raphael how to beat the demon. So they burn the fish. The reek of the fish distressed the demon, who fled through the air to Egypt. Raphael pursued him there and bound and shackled him at once. So yeah, that's not a very descriptive description of that little bit of spiritual warfare there. But to the best of my knowledge, the only description of kind of angels fighting demons in the Bible. I don't know. We'll see what other, as I read through the Apocrypha here in this Catholic Bible, we'll see what's in here later. So that's interesting. And again, according to Wikipedia, this has been a subject for Christian art throughout the centuries. According to Wikipedia, the Book of Tobit in general has inspired a lot of Christian art. Again, a lot of this maybe before the Protestant Reformation and before the Protestants got rid of it. But, still in the Catholic Bibles to this day. So then they pray. There's a big wedding feast. Meanwhile, Tobit and his wife are distressed because their son has not come home. They're worried some disaster caught him up on the road. But Tobias does eventually return. And again, using the guidance of Raphael, gives Tobit back his sight with the magical parts of the fish. Raphael reveals who he is to Tobit and his family. There's some hymns sung to praise God. And then at the end, before Tobit dies, he tells his son to get out of Nineveh because the prophet Nahum elsewhere in the Old Testament is prophesying the destruction of Nineveh. So we know that Nineveh is going to be destroyed imminently. And after Tobit dies, Tobias and his family relocate out of Nineveh to avoid that disaster. So there is a lot to talk about here. Like I said, if you go to Wikipedia, there are a lot of different Wikipedia rabbit holes you can go down in regards to the various interesting things in this book. But I am out of time. My camera has a 30-minute time limit on the video files, so that's how long these videos last for. And in the last minute I have left, I'll just comment on the reading experience of this, which is, this was a lot of fun to read. Some of these books of the Bible are really interesting, and some of them are really boring, the ones that are lists of laws or lists of genealogies, etc. But this was mostly just pure narrative from beginning to end. Now, kind of a bit of a far-fetched and silly story, but leaving aside structural critiques of the story, I just enjoyed being immersed in the narrative of this. for the 12 pages or however it took me to read this. So in terms of a reading experience, judged solely on